This is Kosmographia, the Randall Carlson Podcast.
Now, when we look at the melting of the late Pleistocene, or I'll say late Wisconsin complex for North America, we do see, of course, marginal recession, but there's something else. We see epicenters of melting, catastrophic melting, that might be 500 miles or more from the margin of the ice sheet. You see what I'm getting at here? Yeah. Yeah, that's the problem. We cannot explain it because the geomorphic evidence is not consistent with a simple, prolonged marginal recession. There are melting epicenters, and so far, I don't see anybody explaining that. But this is what I've been doing, and what Brad and myself have been doing, is now exploring in the field the meltwater patterns and mapping them. And to my knowledge, nobody has really mapped the abundant field evidence that shows there are specific points in the vast 6 to 7 million square miles swallowed up by the ice where you had rapid melting. And that melting then moved in several ways. Over the tops of the glaciers, which would be, the term is supra-glacial, and underneath the glaciers, which are called sub-glacial. And it's those flows under the glaciers that really demand more attention than they've gotten, because the theory that came out in the 1980s and 1990s by the late geologist John Shaw up in Canada was that they were produced the drumlins were produced by sub-glacial floods. The problem was, and this is where the critics attacked his theory, they said the drumlin fields are too vast. The amount of meltwater exceeds any normal process that we know. Therefore, it wasn't floods, like you say. Never mind that they've been trying to figure out for 150 years to explain drumlins as the direct action of the glaciers themselves on the substrate. Shaw comes along with a much simpler theory and is able to demonstrate in the laboratory and circumstances in the field where you have the precise reproduction of drumlins on a much smaller scale, where you have water flowing under pressure over a deformable substrate, if that makes sense. Good. So his theory, and now he's no longer alive to defend his theory, but he has students and people who do, and they're mostly Canadian. Doesn't seem to be a lot of American geologists that are really willing to take Shaw's theory seriously. But again, the primary objection is that, well, and this is very much like the objection levied at J. Harlan Brett's back in the 20s and the 30s. Well, you're saying there's all of this evidence out in the field for these catastrophic floods, but you can't provide a source for that much water. Therefore, there was no catastrophic floods. And that was the mindset that prevailed literally up until the 1960s. So, and it's kind of parallel in a way with John Shaw. The idea is, well, you can't explain the source of so much water because the drumlin fields are huge. They're vast, right? So since you don't have a source for the water, it wasn't floods. Yeah. And my disappointment when we found out that we were actually trying to plan a trip and John Shaw was going to join us with George Howard. We were going to look at Lake Nipigon up there, but then, and yeah, when George first contacted him about joining us, he said he would be delighted to join us. And then, ironically, he passed away very shortly after that. So that was a big disappointment to me. But he has students who are carrying on his work, like Jerome Lessman, who was a co-author of a seminal paper that they wrote that came out in 2000. And Brad and I had the opportunity to spend 4 days in the field with Jerome, 3 or 4 years ago. So we were up in the British Columbia drumlin swarm, and came away from that totally convinced that we are looking at catastrophic sub-glacial flows, and that's the only way to explain these things. But again, the Achilles heel is that, wait a second, the volumes of water you're talking about are so enormous that that couldn't be. There's no way to explain that massive volume of water. So therefore, the subglacial flood theory is out the window.
Yeah, that was 2017, so that was over 2 years ago.
Over 2 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, so, and he took us to several places that he thought was critical, and those were places that we had already gone ourselves because we determined that this is something that we definitely had to see. And, those same places he went to us. So I was thinking that big gorge we went to. Yeah. I can't recall the name of it, but it was something like that, just the gorge or something.
Yeah.
So unexpected right there in central southern British Columbia. It had to be massive subglacial meltwater flows.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the Drumlin fields are just farther south of that.
Yeah. Right. So what Brad was just saying, we had already gone up there years before, had explored a number of these sites that we thought were critical to this idea, support of this idea. So then when we get out in the field with Jerome, he ends up taking us to several of those same sites. Well, yeah, we know, we've been here before. We saw this. We figured out on our own that this was, probably significant. So yeah, right. And I wonder maybe we could get Jerome on here to talk drumlins with us one time.
Ooh, that'd be awesome. That was 2015. So that was the year that we had the Grimerica boys there with us at Okotoks.
Oh, right.
South of Calgary. They didn't go with us the whole way, but then the rest of the crowd went up into central BC. But Darren and Graham were with us there at south of Calgary to see Big Rock there, the biggest glacial erratic.
Yeah, that was when we had the Hateful Eight, right? At that point, wasn't there 8 of us? That 2015.
There was 8 of us when they were there with us those 2 days. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but no, the big 8 was when we were out of Moses Lake there in Washington.
Oh, that's right. Right.
That was the van full crowd.
Fabled Hateful Eight.
Uh-huh.
Legendary.
Revisited.
The legendary Fateful Eight, yeah. So.
Well, we just passed an hour? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So just giving you heads up.
All right. Well, yeah. I mean, what I'm very interested in talking about over the next few episodes anyway is really getting down to getting everybody up to speed on the Younger Dryas, some of the controversies back and forth, even looking at some of the ideas of the critics. I think that's very instructive because actually some of the critics have made some very good points, even though I don't necessarily agree with their final conclusions or their general arrogant attitude about that they've already got it all figured out, and anybody who would invoke some silliness like something from space needs to be just ignored. In spite of that, they bring up some interesting points, and I, whenever you're looking at a scientific controversy, you have to look at all the sides, all the arguments, right, and use your own reason. And this is why, as soon as you hear somebody say, well, there's a consensus about this, that's where the red flag should start waving.
Right.
I'm not going to argue about gravity with somebody. For example, I take that as a given. I've fallen out of enough trees and off of enough rooftops and stuff that I do believe in gravity.
Yeah. The phenomena of gravity exists and has been observed. Yeah.
Yeah. But when you're talking about things like, a 1 degree temperature change over 150 years, and that we know exactly why that is, and there's no more discussion about that, well, then I have to say, time out.
Right.
Yeah.
Agree with that.
You agree with that?
I do. I concur.
Okay. I'm relieved. I'm relieved to hear that. Yes.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to look here at a few things. Some of the early work that led to some of the I mean, we could go way back as far as the Younger Dryas, and I'm not going to go way back. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of controversy and discussion over the Younger Dryas before the theory ever got proposed that there might have been an extraterrestrial element to it. That paper came out, right, Firestone paper, Firestone, Kennett, West, and those 2007. This is 1993, and I think it's Paul Mayuski, who is now actually a member of the Comet research team that didn't exist in 1993, but he did studies of the atmosphere during the Younger Dryas, and this is what he had to say about it. This was published in the journal Science, July 9th, 1993, if anybody wants to go look it up. One of the most dramatic climate change events observed in marine and ice core records is the Younger Dryas, a return to near glacial conditions that punctuated the last deglaciation. High resolution, continuous glaciochemical records, newly retrieved from central Greenland, record the chemical composition of the Arctic atmosphere at this time. The record shows that both the onset and the termination of the Younger Dryas occurred within 10 to 20 years, and that massive, frequent, and short-term, meaning a decade or less, changes in atmospheric composition occurred throughout this event. The magnitude and complexity of the soluble species record documented in the Younger Dryas portion of the Greenland Ice Sheet Project 2 core provide evidence of an extremely dynamic atmosphere thus far unparalleled in the Holocene. And I hope by now most of our regular listeners know what the Holocene is. It's the present period of post-glacial warmth that we've been enjoying for 10,000 years, basically, which is now actually dated to have begun 11,600 years ago. And he's saying that when we look at the atmospheric changes that occurred during the Younger Dryas, which marks that transition from full glacial mode to interglacial mode, we don't find any parallel to it throughout the 11,000 years of the Holocene. So
let me throw in here, Randall, that George mentioned several times about the bibliography that they had up on the Cosmic Tusk that reproduces and makes accessible every scientific paper for and against the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. But I'm pretty sure that starts with the seminal paper you're talking about in 2007. So you've got something there from 1993. That may be what he was inquiring, that you add your collection to that bibliography, because you have as good a collection as anybody of those papers leading up to 2007. So we are going to be working toward integrating your bibliography with what they've got available there on the Cosmic Tusk, and really provide all the information to people that want to dig in deep and figure it out and help along with this process. Yeah.
I my interest in the Younger Dryas goes back, again, literally to the 1980s. That's when I became aware of it, when I really became obsessed with this Pleistocene Holocene transition and the events. And then, of course, when the Greenland Ice Sheet Project results first got published in the early 90s, that's when I was in the thick of this. And so that timing was very auspicious in a sense. And so I immediately grasped upon that and saw these extraordinary dramatic changes that had occurred throughout the end of the Ice Age, the late Pleistocene, and became obsessively intrigued by what I was seeing. And that seemed to fit in everything else that I had been looking at, whether it was the Carolina Bays now, or the melting ice sheets, or the mass extinction of the megafauna. Now, of course, we have this climatic record that is showing this precise correlation. And I think it was the episode before last where I pulled up the three graphs, right? One of the graphs was the mortality graph that showed the spike of extinctions that pretty much was centered on the Younger Dryas. It showed the two sea level rises, meltwater pulse 1A, meltwater pulse 1B. If you didn't see that, go back and look at it. It's on there. And then the third thing was the dramatic climate shifts, the warming, the first warming, which now is dated at about 14,006, then the plunge into glacial cold at 12,900, and then the second spike of massive warming at 11,600. And so we have this correlation now between dramatic climate changes, mass extinction of the megafauna, collapse of the ice sheets, and rapid sea level rise. So, what's the explanation? What's been missing in all of this is an integrating theory, some theory that can actually link all those things together. And, if you're going around thinking that the megafauna were exterminated by Paleo-Indian hunters, well, then the rapid sea level rise has nothing to do with that. Or these rapid climate changes. Once those rapid climate changes, though, became apparent, that really was a big blow to the human predation hypothesis, because now people maybe even, I think if you look in the 60s and the 70s, you pretty much see that was more or less the accepted theory as to the extinction. That vague on details, but basically humans were responsible for the mass extinction. When those Greenland ice core records and marine records, which confirmed and supported the ice core records, showed these massive climatic fluctuations, and they're coinciding precisely with the megafaunal disappearance. Well, what that did was provided a lot of evidence in favor that you see now more paleontologists looking at the possibility that, well, maybe it was climate change rather than human predation that caused. However, my question is, okay, well, yeah, you had this climate change, right? These dramatic swings of climate of up to 10 or 12 degrees centigrade within less than a decade. In fact, further studies of those ice cores have shown that in some cases it was less than 5 years, right? We're talking about 18 degrees Fahrenheit. This is a massive temperature shift, right? So the problem is, okay, we could say, well, climate caused the mass extinction. But then what's driving those climate changes? See, it was almost like, well, wait a second, guys, time out. Okay, now we've got human predation on one hand, climate change on the other. But nobody's explaining what's driving these huge climate swings. Where's that at? See, that's where I thought, well, we need to start thinking, expand our thinking a little bit. Be willing to look at some more outrageous ideas, because I'm sorry, exclusive reference to modern processes and scales and rates of modern processes aren't doing the job of explaining this stuff. That was the problem. So
it was Clovis SUVs.
I will pull up one more screen share here because this is the seminal paper that we've been talking about, the one that came out in 2007. Evidence for an extraterrestrial impact 12,900 years ago that contributed to the megafaunal extinctions and the Younger Dryas cooling. And this is a distinguished list of names here. And I think if we look down right here, second row, we see G.A. Howard.
Oh, yeah.
That was our guest last week, and our good friend George. And over here it says, this is as I say here, the paper that started it all in 2007 by Richard B. Firestone, Alan West, James Kennett, and 23 others. Of course, that didn't start it all. Brad and I were working on this for easily 10 years before, but this was the first hardcore pedigreed scientific team that went out and actually confirmed some of the ideas that we had been exploring for at least a decade. So this is what it says: a carbon-rich black layer a carbon-rich black layer dating to 12.9 thousand years ago has been previously identified at 50 Clovis age sites across North America and appears contemporaneous with the abrupt onset of Younger Dryas cooling. The in situ bones of extinct Pleistocene megafauna, along with Clovis tool assemblages, occur below this black matte layer, but not within or above it. Causes for the extinctions, Younger Dryas cooling, and the termination of Clovis culture have long been controversial. In this paper, we provide evidence for an extraterrestrial impact event at 12.9 thousand years ago, which we hypothesized caused abrupt environmental changes that contributed to YD cooling, major ecological reorganization, broad-scale extinctions, and rapid human behavioral shifts at the end of the Clovis period. So that was the abstract of that paper. And needless to say, it ignited a storm of controversy. And we will take that controversy apart and look at it. And we will look at what the critics, what their response to this was. And it's interesting. And like I say, the critics, I think, had some valid points. So,
but a lot of their valid points have been addressed very well in responses from the Comet Research Group, right?
Well, I think it's mostly their invalid points,
right,
that have been really, and we'll get into we'll deconstruct some of the critics. It'll be fun. Absolutely, we will. We will go one more. I'll talk about C. Vance Haynes, who was a distinguished paleontologist for many years, who was actually one of the paleontologists that first had been studying this black matte layer. And I think we looked at a slide from the Murray Springs site last week with George that showed this black matte layer. And of course, we're going to talk about that more in other places where it has been found and studied and so on. But C. Vance Haynes, he was a paleontologist for many, many years, and very distinguished, wrote a lot of papers on the Clovis culture and on this period of time, considered one of the leading experts in the world on this time period. So he wrote a paper that came out, this was within the year, this was 2008. So this is early in the year after the publication of the Firestone paper. And his paper was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences on May 6th. If anybody wants to actually go and look it up, I wouldn't be surprised if it was on Google Scholar or linkable in George's bibliography. He says, of the 97 geoarchaeological sites of this study that bridge the Pleistocene-Holocene transition, or the last deglaciation, approximately 2/3 have a black organic rich layer, or black matte, with radiocarbon ages suggesting they are stratigraphic manifestations of the Younger Dryas cooling episode. In calendar years, 12,900 to 11,600 years ago. This layer, or matte, covers the Clovis age landscape or surface on which the last remnants of the terminal Pleistocene megafauna are recorded. Stratigraphically and chronologically, the extinction appears to have been catastrophic, seemingly too sudden and extensive for either human predation or climate change to have been the primary cause. This sudden termination appears to have coincided with the sudden climatic switch from Alarod warming to Younger Dryas cooling. Recent evidence for extraterrestrial impact, although not yet compelling, needs further testing because a remarkable major perturbation occurred at 12,900 years before present that needs to be explained. So he was taking a pretty open-minded approach to it, which was not apparent in some of the attacks of the critics that came later on.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty open-minded. He said it's not compelling yet, but this needs to be. Yeah.
Exactly. And, again, going back to, Carl Sagan's dictum about extraordinary claims require extraordinary proofs. Yeah. And a quick aside of that, I would like if some of the people that are posting claims about the thunderbolts theory of electrical. So far, I see a lot of claims in some of the discussions and comments, but nobody really presenting a coherent proof. Nobody presenting actual tangible evidence with references and sources that can be followed up on. So if you're going to post stuff supporting those ideas, I want to see references. I want to see names of scientists who are doing the work, and then I'd be glad to have a look at it. And the things that I have seen so far would suggest that there is some merit to the idea, because we know, for example, that when bolides entered the atmosphere like Tunguska, there appears to have been electrical discharges. That's one thing. But to say that Venus came, within a few thousand miles of the Earth 3,500 years ago or whatever, that's a little bit out there. And if you're going to make a claim like that, you better back it up with some pretty damn convincing evidence, okay?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to come here and get this balance between, okay, too outrageous on one side, but too prosaic on the other. In the middle, we're gonna meet in the middle. We need to look at the evidence. You can't just ignore and throw out 200 or 300 years of scientific inquiry to come up with a theory. If you can't fit it into the prevailing body of knowledge, chances are you are not really discovering some totally revolutionary idea. Because you basically are having to ignore the work of thousands of scientists. And I know that's an appeal to authority, and ultimately that is not the final conclusive issue in the matter, how many scientists worked on it. But you can't, on the other end, you can't just ignore that work.
Right. It has to fit into the data.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe show something new that can be tested.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think maybe we pause there, and we will continue with this discussion, and we will begin to take apart some of the peel back some of the layers of this Younger Dryas mystery in the next episode, because it's extremely interesting and profoundly important. Absolutely. Because I think what we're going to try to do is present the idea that Younger Dryas is like the curtain that came down on 150,000 years or 200,000 years of human history. And until we raise that curtain, we're not going to be able to see what was going on there, other than, just the increments that are left to us in various forms. And so we should certainly be exploring some of that kind of evidence, that the kind of stuff that Graham Hancock is doing, because he's looking at the evidence for an Ice Age civilization, right? What you see with the critics of Graham is basically the same posturing all the time, is that, well, it's mostly speculative and we don't have the hard evidence. Where is the remains of the skyscrapers and the airplanes, and assuming that an advanced culture has to look like our own.
Right.
It doesn't. I don't think it does. I think there could have been parallel paths of cultural evolutionary development that really don't even look anything like ours.
Yeah.
Right. And then, given the extremity of the planetary remodeling that has occurred, not just at the end of the last ice age, although that was certainly the most recent and some of the most severe. We can see these kinds of remodeling episodes occurring periodically as we go back through tens of thousands of years and hundreds of thousands of years. And each catastrophe tends to obscure and obliterate the world that existed before. And the catastrophe of the Younger Dryas and the termination of the Pleistocene into the Holocene was profoundly catastrophic. And it was a major planetary remodeling event, if you will. And so, and as we go through this series, people will be able to get the sense themselves as we go through point by point, looking at vast areas that we now know have been completely demolished and replaced, right? People will begin to get the sense, I think, that, oh, well, yeah, okay, so the question now becomes is how did anything actually endure across that transition? And a lot of the critics have attacked the catastrophic scenarios because I think some of the catastrophic scenarios have been oversimplified, and then the critics will take those kind of, it's the straw man thing. They will take those oversimplified scenarios and they'll say, well, if it's an impact, it should have just been one thing all at once, and then it would have been all over. Whereas we actually see that the climate shifted several times there, or the megafauna were already in decline before 12,000, which in some cases is true, yes. But that doesn't rule out the possibility of a protracted series of events. And then we're going to get into analyzing that too when we look at the Neo-catastrophist ideas, which are the ideas that, impacts onto Earth are way more frequent than anybody had previously imagined. And when you begin to start paying attention to the amount of cosmic debris that we're now constantly seeing flying by the Earth, it raises questions. It raises questions about frequency, raises questions about periodicity. When we look below our feet and we discover that the planetary surface is littered, is pockmarked with hundreds of scars of great impacts. And when we understand that the record of biological life on planet Earth is one of constant repeated interruptions with no particular explanation within the normal models of incremental Darwinian evolution through natural selection, right? When we look and realize now that there's been these repeated massive climate changes that have occurred in just a few years that are 10 times greater than what we've seen in the last 150 years, in spite of what certain factions are saying that we are in the midst of this unprecedentedly rapid climate change right now. No, these people have not studied paleoclimatology, so they're not aware of the fact that, at the Balling-Alarad Younger Dryas, there was an 18-degree Fahrenheit warming, perhaps in less than 3 years, right? At the end of the Younger Dryas pre-boreal, which was the second warming spike, very similar. Same thing again. See, the amelioration of the deep cold of the Younger Dryas wasn't some elongated, slow process. It was like that. See? So how do we explain that stuff? Well, I think that right now we've got to come to terms with the fact that we are living on a vulnerable planet. And from time to time, this planet is susceptible to these catastrophic trigger events. And not only have these events caused the extinction of species in the biological record, they're probably also the cause of the extinction of civilizations in the cultural record.
That's a great way to put it. Yep.
Well,
yeah, excellent summary. I think we put up an awesome foundation over the last couple episodes to launch forward from. That was a good exclamation point on it right there.
That was. Yeah. It's
well, on that note, I'm going to go beat my dogs. No. I love my dogs. I don't know where they've been tonight.
Yeah, I haven't seen any white flags behind you.
Curiously quiet.
I haven't either. I guess they're being quiet.
Yeah.
Just be careful what you say about Electric Universe. You might get struck by a thunderbolt.
No, listen, I think there's probably some really interesting stuff in the Electric Universe, and I'm gonna dive into it at some point. Yeah. But I've also seen some stuff that immediately strikes me as being, wait a minute, I read Velikovsky, which is, I think, if you ultimately go back to the source, we're going back to Velikovsky, and I absorbed myself into Velikovsky, decades ago. Some of the first catastrophist stuff I ever read in the early 70s was Velikovsky. And I will give Velikovsky credit for inspiring me to look further. And I think I've talked about this before. His book, Earth in Upheaval, was a very good compilation of what was actually available within the scientific record in the mid-50s that supported the idea of catastrophic events in Earth history. Right. And he drew upon geology, he drew upon anthropology, he drew upon paleontology, he drew upon mythology, and I think all of that was valid. And all of that was extremely useful for coming up with an idea and a recognition that there have been catastrophic episodes in Earth history.
He was asking the right questions.
He was asking the right questions. Then he attempted to explain that, and that's when he got off into this astrophysics that sort of became his Achilles heel, and all of the critics just savaged him over those ideas. Because, you see, he actually described that the evidence for comets wasn't a comet, it was Venus, that Venus was the comet, see? Right. And that Venus was ejected from Jupiter. And, of course, now it's been decades since I've read Velikovsky, but Venus was ejected from Jupiter, and I think, if I recall, the great red eye of Jupiter was where Venus was ejected, and it came in through the solar system, made some close passages by Earth, and then somehow settled down into this almost perfectly circular orbit. It's an elliptical orbit, but very low eccentricity, right? Which if you're talking about a chaotic, and there was no chaos theory back then, but chaos theory would not support that at all. It would support the idea that Venus would essentially just get thrown back out into deep space, and that would be the end of it.
Yeah.
Right. But see, what Velikovsky didn't understand is that a comet, his thought about comets was, well, a comet is, you look at Halley, it's 10 miles in diameter, the Halley nucleus, right? Well, a comet, then, that's too small to cause global damage in this scale, the epic scale, the biblical scale that he was looking at, see? So he had to come up with something grander than a simple comet, right? What we know about comets now is, if a comet strikes the Earth and it's moving at 10 or 20 times the speed of a rifle bullet when it impacts, boom, that is a extraordinary kinetic punch. And then if you have a giant comet, and we're going to review some of this, we'll start with some of this next episode, the idea that the Younger Dryas comet was perhaps 100 kilometers in diameter, right? And then it begins to undergo a hierarchy of fragmentation, see? That creates a whole other scenario, right? And if under that model, there could be multiple impacts on Earth, either simultaneously or spread out over a number of millennia.
Right. And if a bunch of pieces fell into the sun and then we got hit by coronal mass ejections, now you have your electricity. Yeah. So
storms and all that. And we're going to look at solar storms too, and this interesting new evidence about sun grazing comets, which to me could be one of the key things tying a lot of these ideas together.
Yeah.
So
plan.
Sounds like a good plan. And is there anything else we need to say? I want to say this. I want to give a shout out to all the Patreon subscribers out there. This is great. We are definitely going to come up with something for you guys. And if you want to start pulling up some of the comments, it's been suggested that we should address some of the comments, and I would like to do that, starting prioritizing the Patreon people, but looking through and finding there's been some great comments. They have run the gamut, so we should look at some of those, and we are coming up with some really cool ideas for things to try to raise a little the resources to kick this whole stuff up to the next level.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
We want to kick it to the next level, and I think that next level is going to be pretty damn interesting. And we want everybody who's listening to come along with us.
That's right.
Big old bus.
Yeah.
We're gonna need a big bus.
Very large bus.
A very large bus. And it'll be blue, a blue bus.
All right.
Yep, I'll meet you at the back of the blue bus.
Bus driver guy.
Yeah, thanks so much to everybody for your support, your comments, engaging in the conversation on the YouTubes.
That's right.
We are all reading those comments, and
Absolutely,
a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So I'm actually starting to reply to some of them. Some people have some good points and good questions.
You getting into the brawls?
No, I'm
jumping into the giant brawls.
I'm staying away from fights.
All right.
I'm trying to be nice in the chats.
Okay.
But no, people
take the high road.
People have asked some legit questions about production stuff and things like that I'm trying to address.
Well, some of those questions that I've seen have been really interesting, and I really go, oh yeah, I want to go there and delve into that and address that question. But gosh,
a bunch of them.
A bunch of them, yeah. So we're going to have to take it a bite at a time here. But the plan is to keep doing this for a while. So as we do, hopefully we'll be able to get around to addressing more and more of this stuff. And there will be field trips coming up. So we'll be talking about those when they begin to manifest. So we're always looking for good team members.
That's right. And also, I think, so at some point in the future, we are planning on being able to, and occasionally doing live streams.
Yeah.
So in those cases, people will be able to come into the live chat,
which
we'll be able to see while we're doing it, and then people can ask questions. And there's ways to do that where it's very interactive.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be able to ask questions through the text chat, and we can see them coming by and be like, okay, that's a great question. We're going to answer this one. And, go from there. So that'll be fun, and hopefully we'll get up to that capability at some point soon. But we're working towards it.
We're working towards that. That's right. We want people to be involved in real time, no doubt.
Right. Yeah. So.
Yeah, so grateful to all the fans and the people that are consistently listening, and just some incredible input of places that we should go, and have we compared this to that, and so many different things to investigate. I'm really pleased that people are out there, studying these things on their own and have some original input. It's great.
That's right. And you guys can get a hold of us, as you know, Kosmographia017.2 at gmail.com. Send us emails there. We do check them, and we will be getting to the questions eventually, like we said. Also, support the show if you're not already at patreon.com/Randall Carlson. Also, GCREX has a Patreon as well. So if you want to help Brad out with the video, he's got a lot of videos up on GCREX, so you can support him there too. All goes to the same cause, except that one doesn't go directly into Randall's wallet.
That's right.
It's close.
Brad can do whatever he wants with that money.
Whatever he wants.
Whoa. Wait a minute. What? Say what?
This is quickly becoming full time. So if I'm not working, I got to get some income somewhere. So I hate to count on that, but I'm very appreciative that people do want to kick in and support it.
Yeah, he can fill up his gas tank so that he can go pick up Randall, so that they can go on a field trip.
That's right.
Yes.
Got to give him
okay, you got it.
Yeah, everybody. So contribute. We'll start a gas fund for Brad. Gas money.
I'll take it.
That's right.
Thank you.
So we
Thank
got
you.
T-shirts and other swag coming soon. And let's see what else.
Our logo here.
Yes, our logo here.
No better on the black. You got it right there, Russ.
Right. It'll be right here. Put it here, Brad, in the video.
And then, Brad, have you told him yet about you're going to get the logo tattooed onto your head? Have you told him about that yet?
Randall,
I'm sorry. I wasn't. Oh, sorry. We didn't.
For the first time I get to say that to you. Randall, shush. We're going to get to that.
Oh, sorry.
All right, guys. Great show.
Right.
Can't wait for next week.
Good stuff. Thanks, gentlemen.
Good night, everyone.
Good
Out.
That was great.
This is Kosmographia, the Randall Carlson Podcast.